There's a reason you can't stop thinking about someone who hasn't spoken to you in weeks. There's a reason their silence feels louder than their voice ever did. And no, it's not because you're weak. It's because something deep inside you was touched in a way most people will never understand. What if I told you that the real power isn't in their presence? It's in the bond your soul still hasn't fully released. This isn't another story about moving on. This is the truth no one tells you, the truth about why some connections linger in your chest like a storm that never ends. Why your mind still replays moments that are long gone. It's not just love, it's energy. It's the unfinished story that your heart is still trying to make sense of. And the most shocking part, sometimes their silence is not a sign of loss. It's a mirror reflecting the parts of you that still crave healing. Stay with me till the end of this video, because what I'm about to say will shift the way you see this connection forever. You're about to understand why they still live in your mind, why letting go feels impossible, and why your soul keeps calling their name even in their absence. By the end of this, you'll stop seeing your thoughts as weakness and start recognizing the power that's always been yours, because the real transformation doesn't happen when they come back. It happens when you finally see what this silence was meant to awaken in you. Don't look away. This might be the moment that changes everything. When someone lives in your mind without communication, it's easy to confuse that mental presence with weakness. People will tell you to move on, to distract yourself, to stop overthinking. But what they don't understand is this. When your soul experiences a bond that reaches beneath the surface, it doesn't vanish just because the conversation stopped. When someone impacts you at a deep emotional frequency, they occupy more than your memory. They live in your energy. And energy doesn't respond to logic, it responds to connection. That's why no matter how much you try to stay busy, how much you tell yourself, I'm fine, their presence still echoes in the quiet spaces of your mind. It's not because you can't let go, it's because the connection left an imprint so powerful that your subconscious keeps returning to it. This isn't weakness. This is the psychology of emotional attachment. When two energies collide and create something intense, the conscious mind may walk away, but the subconscious takes time to detach. Think about it. You've probably had people come and go in your life, but not all of them left this kind of mark. Some people pass through your story like background noise. Easy to forget, easy to let go. But some, they're different. They touch a part of you that most can't reach. They create emotional memories that don't rely on texts, calls, or daily conversations. They build an invisible connection that lives in the silence. That's why when you wake up, you think of them. When you're alone, their face crosses your mind. They are not physically present, but mentally, emotionally, energetically. They still exist in your world. And here's the part most people ignore: your mind holds on not because it's weak, but because it's wired to preserve meaningful bonds. The brain doesn't distinguish between physical presence and emotional intensity. It clings to emotional safety, familiarity, and significance. So when someone touches your core, your brain protects that bond like it's a part of your identity. That's why letting go feels unnatural at first. It's like cutting off a part of yourself. But what makes this even more powerful is understanding that your heart isn't stupid. You don't think of just anyone this way. You think of them because they awakened a part of you that had been quiet for a long time. They reflected something back to you. Maybe love, maybe belonging, maybe recognition. And when that energy is taken away, your mind doesn't just miss the person, it misses the feeling that connection gave you. That's why the silence feels louder than any conversation ever did. This isn't about being stuck. It's about acknowledging that real connections are rare, that not every bond is meant to be forgotten overnight, that your emotional depth isn't something to be ashamed of. If anything, The fact that you can hold someone in your mind without constant communication shows that you have the capacity to love beyond conditions. You don't need validation to feel what's real. You don't need texts to remember a soul that touched yours. But here's the truth you must face. Mental presence doesn't equal permanence. Just because they're in your mind doesn't mean they're meant to stay in your life. The bond can be real without being eternal. The energy can be strong without needing daily words to sustain it. And sometimes, the fact that you can feel someone so intensely in their absence is proof of your emotional power, not their control over you. When you recognize that, everything changes. Instead of fighting your thoughts, you begin to understand them. Instead of judging yourself for caring, you start respecting the depth of your heart. And in that understanding, something beautiful happens. The energy begins to shift. It stops controlling you. It becomes a part of your story, not your cage. This is what most people never grasp. Strength isn't about erasing what you feel. It's about acknowledging it, owning it, and still choosing to live fully in the present. That person may have been part of your journey, but they're not the destination. Their memory may still echo in your mind, but it no longer dictates your direction. And maybe, just maybe, the reason their presence is so loud in your silence is because the universe wanted to remind you of your own capacity to feel deeply. That's a gift, not a burden. So stop calling it weakness. Stop shaming yourself for remembering. Feel it, honor it, but also rise above it, because the moment you realize your thoughts are proof of your emotional strength, not your emotional chains, that's the moment you set yourself free. What keeps someone living rent-free in your mind is often not the person themselves. It's the unfinished story you built around them. It's the chapters that never got written, the words that were never said, the endings you never received. That quiet space where the truth was supposed to be, your mind fills it with what it errors wishes had happened. And that is where the emotional loop begins. You replay moments in your head, not because they were perfect, but because they were incomplete. Your heart doesn't like loose ends. It craves resolution, closure, clarity. And when it doesn't get that, it holds on, not to reality, but to the version of events it creates in silence. That's why sometimes it feels like the connection grows stronger with distance. It's not that the person is doing anything to keep the bond alive. It's you feeding the energy through every what if and maybe one day that crosses your mind. This is the psychological trap of emotional attachment. The human mind doesn't like gaps, so when it doesn't have an explanation, it invents one. When someone leaves without clarity, your mind writes its own script. You remember the last smile, the last look, the moments where you felt something real, and then, instead of accepting that it ended, your heart tries to rewrite it. It builds a fantasy that feels safer than the reality of their silence. You start imagining them thinking of you. You imagine them coming back. You imagine the conversation where everything is explained, where they finally say, "I felt it too." That's the fantasy, and it's seductive because it gives you a sense of control in a situation where you had none. It lets you hold on without having to face the pain of letting go. But the truth is, you're not holding on to them. You're holding on to the version of them your mind created in their absence. This is where emotional maturity comes in. It's realizing that closure doesn't always come from another person. Sometimes, closure is the moment you stop trying to rewrite the story and accept the silence for what it is. An ending, a real, raw, painful ending that doesn't need your approval to exist. You don't need their explanation to validate what you felt, and you don't need their return to make your love real. When you let the fantasy live too long, it becomes dangerous. It keeps you emotionally trapped in a story that isn't unfolding. You start mistaking your own hope for proof, and that's how you give someone who's not even present power over your present moment. The more time you spend in that imagined version, the further you drift from your reality, and your growth gets stuck in the shadow of a bond that may have never been what you thought it was. But here's the deeper truth. It's not your fault. Humans are wired to seek meaning. When something emotionally intense happens, the brain doesn't want to accept uncertainty. It will keep searching, questioning, idealizing. But there's a turning point, a moment when you must decide to stop looking for answers in their silence and start finding them in your own strength. The fantasy might have felt safe, but it's not real. And no matter how much you build that imagined story, it won't bring them back or change what was left unsaid. What truly sets you free is choosing to see the difference between what happened and what you wished had happened. It's painful, yes. It stings like nothing else. But that pain is honest, and honest pain heals. Fantasy doesn't. Once you accept that, their grip on your mind begins to loosen. The story starts to lose its power, and slowly your thoughts return to you. This is the part that demands courage, not the kind that looks loud and brave from the outside, but the quiet kind that whispers, I deserve to live outside of what never happened. It's realizing that your worth doesn't live in the ending you didn't get. It lives in your ability to walk forward, even when the story didn't go the way your heart wanted. So if their face keeps appearing in your mind, ask yourself honestly, is it them you miss, or the story your heart still wants to tell? Are you in love with the person, or with the possibility? This level of self-awareness changes everything, because when you identify the fantasy, you reclaim your power. The silence is not your enemy. It's the mirror that forces you to see the truth. And once you face that truth, the hold they have on you starts to dissolve. That's the power of acceptance. That's the beginning of emotional freedom, because the reality is simple. Unfinished stories only have power if you keep writing them in your mind. The day you stop adding new chapters is the day the story ends, and that's when your new life begins. Just because someone's presence lives in your mind doesn't mean they're meant to return to your life. That's the uncomfortable truth most people don't want to face. We're wired to believe that if a connection feels strong enough, it must have some destined ending, some cosmic full circle where everything makes sense. But not every bond is meant to last forever. Some people are not the final chapter. They're the sentence that wakes you up. There are people who come into your life not to stay, but to shift something inside you, to challenge the way you see yourself, to make you feel something so raw and intense that it leaves a permanent imprint on your emotional DNA. And the moment they step out of your life, everything in you feels unsteady because their role wasn't to give you a forever. It was to open a door inside you that had been closed for too long. That's why their absence feels louder than their presence ever did. You keep wondering why you can't let go, why their energy still lingers when you've accepted they're not coming back. But here's the thing. You're not holding on to them. You're holding on to the meaning they brought into your world. Maybe they reminded you of your worth when you had forgotten it. Maybe they awakened a part of you that was sleeping. Maybe they showed you what you actually desire in a connection, even if they weren't capable of giving it to you fully. That's not a failure. That's transformation. Life has a way of sending people as lessons wrapped in love, intensity, or even chaos. And when they leave, it's not a punishment, it's evolution. Your mind may still crave them, but your soul knows they were never meant to be the destination. They were the catalyst, the spark that pushed you closer to the person you're meant to become. The truth is, if every person we connected deeply with stayed forever, we'd never grow. We'd never learn the power of release. We'd never experience the strength of standing on our own 2 feet after something broke us open. There's a quiet kind of strength that's born not when someone chooses you, but when you choose to rise even after they're gone. That's when emotional maturity is born, in the moments when your heart wants to hold on, but your soul whispers, "This is where you walk alone." This doesn't mean the bond wasn't real. It just means its purpose has been fulfilled. And that's something most people misunderstand. A meaningful connection isn't only defined by its duration. Some people can stay in your life for years and never move your soul. Others can pass through it for a short time and change everything about you. The depth isn't measured in time. It's measured in impact. And their impact on you doesn't have to end with their presence. It can continue through your growth, your strength, your evolution. Letting go doesn't erase the memory. It doesn't undo the feelings. What it does is shift the energy from attachment to understanding. It allows you to honor what the bond gave you without being trapped by it. That's the difference between clinging to the past and carrying the lesson forward. One keeps you stuck. The other sets you free. And here's a hard truth to swallow. Sometimes love isn't supposed to be possessed. Sometimes it's supposed to be experienced, felt deeply, and then released. That doesn't make it less real. It makes it pure. Because love that tries to control and hold on at all costs loses its essence. But love that recognizes its season and still chooses gratitude, that's strength. That's growth. When you stop viewing their presence as your missing piece and start seeing it as the chapter that shaped you, everything shifts. You no longer wait for their return to feel whole. You stop measuring your worth by their absence. You start to realize that they were never the ending. They were the push that made you build a stronger version of yourself. It's easy to romanticize someone's return. But it's far more powerful to romanticize your own growth after they're gone. It's easy to hope they'll come back and make it make sense. But it's life changing to accept that they might not and still find peace anyway. That's where real power lies, in your ability to love, to feel, to lose, and still rise without bitterness. So if their presence still echoes in your mind, let it remind you of how deeply you can feel. Let it remind you of your capacity to love. Let it remind you that you are capable of creating meaning even in endings. But don't let it chain you to a door that's already closed. Some people were never meant to be your forever. They were meant to be your awakening. And the moment you stop chasing what's already served its purpose, you create space for what's meant for you. That's where your story truly begins again. Not with their return, but with your rise.